In the dark waters of Guadalcanal, Japanese sailors whispered about an American cruiser that fired so fast. Its guns sounded like machine guns ripping through cloth. They weren't wrong to fear her. The USS Helena, CL-50, had survived what should have destroyed her at Pearl Harbor, only to return with a vengeance that would reshape naval warfare in the Pacific. This is the story of the ship that refused to die, a cruiser that earned her nickname through raw firepower, and the 1,000 men who turned her into a legend. At a time when battleships ruled the seas and carriers were seen as the future, Helena proved that even a light cruiser, driven by determination, could change the course of history. Her story doesn't begin in battle, but in the hard years of the Great Depression. As America rebuilt its struggling economy, the Navy launched an ambitious plan to modernize its fleet. The new St. Louis-class cruisers were built with a bold idea: ships that could unleash overwhelming firepower while still being fast enough to dance with death. On a cold December day in 1936, Helena's keel was laid at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Few could have guessed the fate waiting for hull number 50. The workers who hammered her plates and shaped her armor weren't just building another warship. They were forging an instrument of survival and vengeance. Helena stretched 608 feet from bow to stern, her slim 61-foot beam slicing clean through the water. But her true strength lay in her guns. 15 6-inch rifles, mounted in 5 triple turrets, gave her a broadside that could unleash pure hell. And these weren't just any naval guns. The Mark 16s could fire at a blistering pace. Under ideal conditions, each barrel could spit out 8 to 10 rounds per minute. Do the math. That's up to 150 shells a minute from her main battery alone. No wonder the Japanese came to call her the machine gun cruiser. Her main battery was backed up by 5-inch dual-purpose guns, just as capable of blasting enemy planes from the sky as they were at tearing apart destroyers. Four powerful Parsons turbines drove her through the ocean at 32.5 knots, fueled by 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers that could generate 100,000 horsepower and turn her 4 bronze screws. With a range of 10,000 nautical miles, Helena could hunt anywhere across the vast Pacific. But numbers and specifications tell only part of her story. What truly made Helena special was her crew, 868 officers and men who would take steel and gunpowder and turn it into something close to immortality. On August 27, 1938, Helena slipped into the East River, christened by the wife of Montana's senator. The champagne bottle that shattered against her bow was meant to bring good fortune. Whether it did or not depended on how you defined luck. Her early years read more like a peacetime travel diary than the story of a warship. After being commissioned in September 1939, Helena sailed south to Uruguay. There, her crew got a haunting glimpse of their own possible fate. In Montevideo harbor lay the wreck of the German pocket battleship Graf Spee, scuttled after the Battle of the River Plate. The young American sailors looked at the twisted steel and silently wondered if one day they might meet the same end. But the Pacific was calling, and Helena answered. By September 1940, she had joined the Pacific Fleet, spending long months in Hawaiian waters, sharpening her skills. Gunnery drills, damage control exercises, navigation training, the endless, grueling routines that turned ordinary civilians into hardened warriors. As 1941 drew to its tense close, Helena entered the Mare Island Navy Yard for upgrades. Perhaps sensing the storm that was about to break, the Navy fitted her with new 1.1-inch anti-aircraft guns that it was like handing a boxer brass knuckles right before a street fight. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Helena rested at berth 1010 in Pearl Harbor's Navy Yard. Across the harbor, battleships sat neatly lined along Ford Island. The mighty battleship Pennsylvania was supposed to occupy Helena's berth, but fate had other plans. The dry dock needed Pennsylvania more than the pier needed Helena. At 7:57 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Shiharu Murata led 9 Kate torpedo bombers toward what he thought was Pennsylvania. Through the morning haze, Helena's outline looked enough like a battleship to make her the target. Only the lead plane released its weapon, a Type 91 torpedo that streaked through the calm harbor waters at 40 knots. It passed beneath the mine layer Oglala, moored alongside, and slammed into Helena at frame 75, just below her armor belt. The explosion tore through her engineering spaces like a giant's fist. Engine room 1 and boiler room 2 instantly turned from neat machinery spaces into twisted metal coffins. Seawater poured in through a hole big enough to drive a truck through. But Helena was already fighting back. Within 2 minutes, her forward diesel generator roared to life. Power surged to her gun mounts. As Japanese planes circled for their second attack, Helena's anti-aircraft guns opened fire in defiance. 4 bombs straddled her in the second wave. Each near-miss rained steel fragments across her decks. Somehow, the ship that should have died stayed alive, through miracles of damage control and the stubborn courage of her crew. 40 sailors were dead, another 100 wounded. In the wardroom, blood mixed with oil as doctors and corpsmen fought to save lives. On deck, gunners kept firing even as their shipmates fell around them. Japanese pilots later reported Helena as sunk. They were terribly wrong. They had only awakened the sleeping giant's little sister, and she would remember. In the days after Pearl Harbor, Helena looked like a patient in intensive care. Water sloshed through her battered hull, and emergency pumps worked endlessly to keep her afloat. Yet beneath the damage was a heart that refused to stop beating. By December 9th, just 2 days after the attack, Helena limped into dry dock number 2. Navy yard workers swarmed over her like surgeons over a wounded patient. Steel plates were cut, shaped, and welded across her torn side. The patches were temporary, just enough to hold until she could reach a proper hospital. That test came in January 1942, when Helena made the journey to Mare Island. The Pacific swells hammered against her patched hull, probing for weakness. Her crew stayed at the ready, manning damage control stations, prepared to fight off any new flood. They needn't have worried. Helena was tougher than she looked. At Mare Island, Helena wasn't just repaired, she was reborn. The Navy had learned bitter lessons at Pearl Harbor, and Helena would carry the results of that hard schooling. Her old conning tower, which restricted visibility in night battles, was replaced with an open bridge. The outdated 1.1-inch Chicago pianos were ripped out, and in their place came 4 quadruple 40mm Bofors guns, Swedish-designed democracy wrapped in American steel. But the biggest change was invisible. Helena was fitted with the new SG surface search radar, a technological marvel that could pierce darkness and fog, spotting enemy ships at ranges that seemed almost like magic. Combined with her new fire control systems, Helena was no longer just a cruiser. She was becoming something far more dangerous. With her new FD fire control radars, Helena could fight blind, a priceless advantage in the knife fight battles that awaited her in the Solomons. Darkness might hide ships from the naked eye, but radar let Helena see without being seen. Under Captain Robert H. English and later Captain Charles P. Cecil, who took command until September 1942, Helena's crew trained with near-fanatic intensity. They had scores to settle. Gunners drilled until they could load and fire in their sleep. Damage control teams rehearsed sealing holes and fighting fires until their actions became pure instinct. Everyone aboard understood the mission. They were heading back to the Pacific, not as victims, but as hunters. In the mess halls, sailors spoke of revenge. In the engine rooms, mechanics squeezed every last ounce of power from her turbines. Helena wasn't just repaired, she had been reborn as an instrument of vengeance. By July 1942, she was ready. As Helena passed beneath the Golden Gate Bridge on her way to the South Pacific, her crew lined the rails. Some waved goodbye to wives and girlfriends on shore. Others simply stared westward, toward the enemy who had drawn first blood. The machine gun cruiser was heading to war. The Solomon Islands in late 1942 were a green hell where America and Japan fought savagely for every foot of jungle. Guadalcanal, with its precious airfield, had become the grinding wheel of the Pacific War. Every night, Japanese destroyers and cruisers raced down the slot, the narrow channel between the Solomon chain, to reinforce their garrisons and shell American positions. By early October, Helena had joined Task Force 64 under Rear Admiral Norman Scott. Unlike many admirals still clinging to old battleship line tactics, Scott understood that radar and rapid fire would rule these waters. He drilled his ships hard in night combat maneuvers, though strangely, he chose USS San Francisco as his flagship instead of radar-equipped Helena. On October 11, 1942, the day of reckoning drew near. American reconnaissance planes reported Admiral Aratamo Goto's force streaming toward Guadalcanal. 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers loaded with reinforcements and shells for bombardment. Scott moved his task force into position off Cape Esperance, ready to spring the trap. As night fell, Helena's SG radar operator, Radioman 3rd Class Robert S. Brown, leaned over his glowing scope. The screen flickered with shadows of history about to unfold. At T-2325, A glowing blip appeared on the radar screen. Enemy ships at 27,700 yards. Helena had spotted the Japanese long before they even realized Americans were waiting for them. What followed was organized chaos. Admiral Scott, operating blind from San Francisco, ordered a column turn that by sheer chance placed his force across the Japanese T, the perfect setup for an ambush at sea. On Helena's bridge, Captain Gilbert C. Hoover, who had taken command in September, grew frustrated. His radar showed enemy ships just 5,000 yards away, point-blank range, but Scott hadn't given the order to fire. Finally, at 23:46, Scott gave a vague "Roger" in response to another query, and Helena's crew took it as permission to open fire. Her turrets, already locked on target, erupted with thunder. The first salvo smashed into the Japanese heavy cruiser Aoba, catching her completely by surprise. 6-inch shells tore into her bridge, killing Admiral Goto instantly and wounding her captain. In his final moments, the Japanese admiral believed he was being attacked by his own ships. He never imagined Americans could strike with such deadly accuracy out of the darkness. Helena's gunners fired at a pace that seemed unreal. Spent brass shells clattered across her decks like golden rain as loaders worked in perfect rhythm. The relentless muzzle flashes lit the night sky, earning Helena the nickname that would follow her to her grave, the machine gun cruiser. The heavy cruiser Furitaka tried to shield her flagship, but instead sailed straight into a storm of steel. Helena's shells struck her torpedo mounts, igniting Japan's feared long-lance torpedoes right on her own deck. Furitaka burned like a funeral pyre before slipping beneath the black waves. In just 14 minutes, it was over. Helena had fired more than 1,400 shells, her gun barrels glowing cherry red in the dark. The Battle of Cape Esperance became America's first decisive surface victory over the Imperial Navy. Helena had proven that U.S. cruisers could fight and win, at night, the battlefield Japan thought was theirs alone. When dawn came, oil slicks and debris floated where Japanese ships had died. Helena's crew, drained but electrified, had tasted victory for the first time. It would not be their last. By November 1942, desperation gripped both sides at Guadalcanal. The Japanese prepared a massive reinforcement convoy and Admiral Scott's victorious task force, now under Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan, brave but inexperienced, stood as the only barrier that in night combat. Admiral Callahan made the same mistake as Scott before him. He chose San Francisco as his flagship instead of the radar-equipped Helena. On the night of November 12th to 13th, Helena's radar once again proved its worth. At 0:24, her SG scope picked up Japanese ships entering Iron Bottom Sound, the stretch of water off Guadalcanal, so filled with wrecks it had earned that grim name. The enemy came heavy. 2 battleships, Hai and Kurashima, leading a bombardment force meant to smash Henderson Field into rubble. At 1:48, what followed was less a naval battle than a barroom brawl fought with 14-inch guns. The American column practically collided with the Japanese. Ships fired at point-blank range, often unsure if they were hitting friend or foe. Searchlights slashed across the darkness. Star shells burst overhead, and tracers crisscrossed the night like deadly fireworks. Here, Helena's radar gave her the edge. While other ships struggled to make sense of the chaos, her fire control systems locked Japanese ships with cold precision. She opened fire on what her crew believed was a battleship, likely Hai, just 4,200 yards away. Her rapid salvos walked up and down the enemy's hull, igniting fires and explosions. Then the destroyer Akatsuki made a fatal mistake. She switched on her searchlight and lit up Helena. It was her death sentence. Every American gun that could bear turned on the glowing target. Helena's 6-inch shells joined the storm of 5 and 8-inch fire, converging in a blinding barrage that tore Akatsuki apart. She disappeared in a massive explosion, taking nearly all of her crew with her. Helena shifted fire to 3 more destroyers. Her guns roared so quickly that Japanese survivors later swore the Americans must have invented a new kind of automatic cannon. 1 destroyer limped away in flames. Another went dead in the water. The 3rd fled into the night trailing smoke. Through it all, Helena weaved between salvos, her engineers driving the turbines to their very limits and beyond. At one point, San Francisco blundered across Helena's line of fire, forcing her to cease fire. An accident that likely spared American lives. That night's chaos brought tragedy. Admiral Callahan and Captain Casson Young of San Francisco, both brave men, were killed not by the enemy, but by American shells in the confusion of battle. After 40 minutes of brutal, point-blank fighting, the Japanese force pulled back. Their battleship High, hammered by dozens of hits, including many from Helena, was left behind, her rudders jammed. The next morning, American planes finished the job. High became the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. Helena emerged with just one man dead and only minor damage. Her gunners had fired over 1,500 rounds, their barrels worn out from the furious pace. But she had done her part, helping stop the Tokyo Express in its tracks. Because the bombardment had been broken up, Henderson Field survived, and from its runways American planes would soon tear apart Japanese transports. When the sun rose on November 13th, Iron Bottom Sound had earned its name once again, its seafloor littered with fresh wrecks. Helena had proven herself yet again, though each victory came at a steeper cost. Between the legendary battles, life on Helena was a grinding test of endurance as punishing as combat itself. The Solomon Islands gave no mercy. If Japanese shells didn't kill you, tropical diseases might. Helena's crew developed the 1,000-yard stare of Guadalcanal veterans, men aged beyond their years by endless nights of watchfulness. Life aboard followed the rhythm of war. General quarters at dawn and dusk, when submarines liked to strike. Days spent bombarding Japanese positions on Guadalcanal, blasting jungle strongholds into craters. Nights patrolling the slot, radar operators straining to catch the first flicker of enemy ships. Amid it all, the crew built their own strange culture of survival. Helena's laundry became famous across the fleet, somehow producing freshly pressed uniforms even after the ship had been through battle. The ship's band, Helena's Hot Shots, lifted spirits with swing tunes on deck between actions, their jazzy version of blues in the night drifting across the water to nearby ships. Food was whatever supply ships could provide. Spam, powdered eggs, and coffee so strong it could float a wrench. Fresh vegetables became a distant memory. And when the ice cream machine worked, it produced the most prized treasure in the South Pacific. Men would trade almost anything for a scoop. For a Dixie cup of vanilla ice cream, men would trade almost anything. Captain Hoover proved a steady hand during his time in command. Unlike officers who chased glory, he understood that in these waters, survival was victory. He drilled his crew hard, but he also knew when to let up. Movie nights on the fantail, boxing matches on the forecastle, small pleasures that reminded the men what they were fighting for. The crew took it hard when, on November 23rd, Captain Hoover was relieved of command. His offense: failing to properly report the torpedoing of USS Juneau. To the men, it felt like punishment for paperwork, a bureaucratic vendetta. They had just gone through hell with him, and now their skipper was gone. His replacement, Captain Charles P. Cecil, took command in December 1942. The crew was wary at first, but Cecil would prove himself, and he would lead them through their final battles. The closing months of 1942 and the start of 1943 blurred together in a haze of exhaustion. Helena bombarded Vila and Munda, escorted convoys, and chased phantom contacts on her radar. Her sailors became masters of survival, trained eyes scanning sea and sky, knowing that a single second, spotting the white trail of a torpedo or the glint of a falling bomb, could mean the difference between life and death. By February 1943, Helena was worn thin. Her engines wheezed, her gun barrels showed deep grooves from constant firing, and her hull carried the scars of near misses. The trip to Sydney, Australia, felt like a journey to paradise. Fresh food, cold beer, and women who spoke English awaited them. For a few short weeks, Helena's men tasted peace again. But war doesn't stop for liberty. By April, Helena was back in the Solomons, her guns relined, her crew rested, ready for the next round. The machine gun cruiser still had work to do. As spring turned to summer in 1943, American forces prepared their next step up the Solomon chain. The target was New Georgia, with its vital airfield at Munda, the next bloody rung on the ladder toward Tokyo. Helena's role was clear: join the preliminary bombardments and reduce Japanese strongholds to rubble. The routine had become deadly familiar. Slip into enemy waters under the cover of night, unleash a torrent of shells, and vanish before dawn brought Japanese retribution. On May 13th, Helena led one such bombardment that Helena's guns opened up against Vila, her shells tearing through fuel dumps and barracks with cold precision. The Japanese, learning from hard experience, had already moved many of their supplies inland, but Helena still found plenty left to smash. By June 1943, the pace of operations only grew more intense. Intelligence warned of massive Japanese reinforcement efforts, and every American cruiser worked around the clock to cut them off. Helena's crew, battle-hardened veterans now, prepared their ship with grim efficiency. Extra ammunition was crammed into every space until her magazines bulged. Damage control gear was staged and ready. And quietly, many men wrote letters home, just in case. On June 30th, Operation Toenails, the invasion of New Georgia began. Helena provided fire support for the landings at Rendova, her 6-inch shells blasting clearings through the jungle in swaths 100 yards wide. Japanese shore batteries fought back, their shells splashing closer and closer to Helena, until her counter-battery fire silenced them for good. Then came July 4th, 1943, Independence Day. While fireworks cracked in American cities, Helena was bombarding Munda Airfield. The Japanese had reinforced their anti-aircraft positions, and black puffs of flak filled the sky. Helena's own gunners answered, her 40mm mounts blazing, tracer rounds stitching arcs of light into the darkness. It was democracy versus fascism, spelled out in fire across the night sky. That evening, Helena refueled at Tulagi, taking on oil and ammunition for yet another mission. Intelligence had spotted another Tokyo Express, Japanese destroyers racing south with reinforcements for New Georgia. Task Force 68, with Helena at its heart, would intercept them in Kula Gulf. The crew felt something different about this one. Maybe it was the full moon predicted that night, its light erasing the darkness that usually shielded American ships, even though Helena's radar gave her eyes the enemy lacked. Or maybe it was the rumors, reports of heavy Japanese reinforcements moving down the slot. Whatever it was, the men knew. This fight would be unlike the others. Maybe it was the reports of Japanese heavy cruisers joining the convoy runs. Or maybe it was just the law of averages catching up. Helena had survived too many battles without taking serious damage. As July 5th slipped into July 6th, Helena steamed into Kula Gulf for the last time. Her radar operators, the best in the fleet, would, as always, be the first to spot the enemy. And her guns would roar with their trademark, machine gun fury. But this time, the enemy would strike back with a vengeance even Helena could not withstand. The moon rose over Kula Gulf like a cruel spotlight, turning the water silver and stripping away the darkness that usually hid the Americans. Admiral Walden Ainsworth, his flag flying from USS Honolulu, led Task Force 68 into the Gulf just after midnight on July 6, 1943. Helena followed in column, her radar already painting targets to the northwest. But the Japanese had learned from bitter experience. Admiral Teruo Akiyama's reinforcement force wasn't just another Tokyo Express run. It was a pack of 10 destroyers armed with the fearsome Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes. These monsters could run 20,000 yards at nearly 50 knots, and the Japanese had finally adapted their tactics to counter the Americans' radar edge. At 0136, Helena's radar picked up the enemy at 22,000 yards. But this time, the Japanese spotted Task Force 68 almost at the same moment. Both sides closed in, each knowing that speed, not armor, would decide the fight. At 0157, Admiral Ainsworth gave the order to attack. Helena's turrets, already locked on their targets, erupted in thunder. Her first salvos streaked across the moonlit waters. Helena's first salvos locked onto the destroyer Niizuki, Admiral Akiyama's flagship. At 11,000 yards, it was an easy shot for her seasoned gunners. Niizuki never stood a chance. Helena's second salvo slammed home, and the ones that followed turned the destroyer into a floating inferno. 6-inch shells ripped open her hull, detonated her torpedoes, and shattered her bridge. Admiral Akiyama died within minutes, his last sight the blinding muzzle flashes that sealed his fate. But while Niizuki burned, her sister ships had already unleashed their revenge. All 10 Japanese destroyers fired spreads of their deadly Long Lance torpedoes before racing away at top speed. Nearly 50 of the fearsome weapons now streaked silently through the dark waters of Kula Gulf, fanning out toward the American column. Helena kept firing, her radar-directed salvos now hammering the destroyer Suzuki. Her shells found their mark even at long range, but Helena had made a deadly mistake. At the start, she had been using flashless powder, carefully saved for night battles. But when that supply ran out, she switched to standard propellant. Every salvo now lit up the night sky like a thunderclap, marking Helena's position with cruel precision for Japanese torpedo officers. At 0203, Helena's luck ran out. 3 long lances struck her in rapid succession, and the machine gun cruiser began to die. The first hit slammed into her bow, just ahead of turret 1. The explosion was catastrophic. Either her forward magazine went up, or the torpedo's massive 1,080-pound warhead simply tore her apart. Turret 1 vanished in a roaring fireball that shot 200 feet into the night sky. The blast ripped through her forward compartments, crushing steel and hurling men against bulkheads like rag dolls. Before damage control could react, 2 more torpedoes slammed into her midsection beneath the armor belt. The impacts broke Helena's keel, her very backbone. The engine rooms flooded instantly, turbines screaming before falling silent as seawater swallowed them. Power failed. Darkness fell across her passageways, broken only by the glow of flames and the dim flicker of battle lanterns. Captain Cecil knew at once what had happened. With her keel broken, Helena was doomed. She was already beginning to jackknife, her great hull folding under the weight of her wounds. Captain Cecil gave the order every commander dreads: abandon ship. But Helena's gunners weren't done yet. Even as the cruiser began to sink, her aft turrets kept spitting fire. The crews refused to leave their posts until the sea claimed their guns. Turret 4 kept firing until seawater flooded the handling rooms. Turret 5's crew, working by hand, trained their weapons and fired until the ship's list grew so steep they couldn't raise the barrels anymore. Then Helena broke apart. The bow section, everything forward of Turret 2, was already gone. The stern, with nearly 400 men aboard, floated free like a ghost ship. The center section, containing the bridge and most of the engineering spaces, rolled and vanished beneath the waves within minutes. Hundreds of men were thrown into oil-slicked water, some wounded, all stunned by how quickly the battle had turned into a desperate fight to survive. The destroyer Nicholas, risking torpedo attack, steamed in to help. Her crew pulled men aboard, forming human chains to drag the oil-covered sailors to safety. All the while, Nicholas's guns barked at Japanese destroyers prowling nearby, determined to finish off any survivors. At dawn on July 6th, Kula Gulf was a graveyard, strewn with wreckage, oil, and the battered remains of Helena's crew. Nearly 500 men still floated in the water. The bow and stern sections of the cruiser, miraculously still afloat, served as makeshift rafts for hundreds of exhausted sailors. But daylight brought new danger. Japanese aircraft would surely arrive, and Admiral Ainsworth faced a terrible choice. During the night, Nicholas and Radford had saved 739 men, dragging them aboard in exhausting, all-night efforts. But radar showed enemy warships still in the area. With dawn breaking, an air attack was certain. Reluctantly, Ainsworth ordered his destroyers to withdraw, leaving hundreds of Helena's men behind. For those still in the water, July 6th became a brutal test of human endurance. The tropical sun seared bare skin. Salt water chewed into open wounds. Sharks, drawn by blood, circled the survivors. Groups of sailors banded together, supporting the wounded, clinging to wreckage, and sharing the few life rafts still afloat that on Helena's floating stern, Lieutenant Commander John L. Chu took charge of the survivors. The wreck still held a little food, fresh water, and some medical supplies. Chu organized watches, rationed what they had, and kept order among the men. When Japanese float planes swooped down to strafe them, the sailors scrambled beneath twisted steel for cover. That night, 2 American destroyers tried to rescue the stranded crew, but Japanese warships forced them back. The men spent another long night clinging to wreckage, their numbers shrinking as the wounded slipped away and sharks circled hungrily in the dark. It could have ended there, hundreds lost forever, if not for Coast Watcher Reverend A.W.I. Sylvester on Vella La Vella Island. He spotted the survivors and worked with local islanders to guide rescuers to them. On the night of July 7th or 8th, destroyers Nicholas and Jenkins, along with fast transports Dent and Waters, slipped back into Kula Gulf. Using whaleboats and rubber rafts, their crews hauled 165 men from the water and from the still-floating stern. As if waiting for her duty to be finished, Helena's stern sank during the rescue, her final act complete. But 88 men had drifted to Japanese-held Vella La Vella. For a week, they dodged enemy patrols with the help of native scouts and coast watchers. Living on coconuts and rainwater, moving only under the cover of night, they finally reached the island's northwest coast. On July 16th, destroyers Taylor, Maury, Gridley, and Ralph Talbot launched a daring daylight rescue, pulling the last survivors out from under the very noses of Japanese forces. Out of Helena's crew of 868, about 168 men were lost in Kula Gulf or during the rescue attempts. But 700 survived, saved by the courage of destroyer crews who risked everything and by their own unbreakable will to live. Helena could have been just another casualty of the Solomon Islands campaign, but instead she became something greater. Because legends don't die easily, in Navy wardrooms and enlisted clubs, old sailors told stories about the cruiser that fired faster than any ship had the right to. Her rapid-fire guns became legend, each retelling making her sound even more unstoppable. The Navy itself honored Helena with 7 battle stars and the very first Navy unit commendation ever given to a ship. The award named 3 battles, Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and Kula Gulf, where Helena's guns helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. But her legacy went beyond medals. What Helena did in combat changed the way the U.S. Navy fought. Her success with radar in night battles became standard doctrine. Her need for flashless powder was written in blood. And the lessons of her sinking led to new damage control procedures that saved lives on other ships. For decades, Helena lay hidden in Kula Gulf, her exact resting place unknown. Survivors gathered at reunions, fewer each year, but their memories remained sharp. They remembered the roar of her guns, the steel beneath their boots, and the shipmates who never came home. Then in April 2018, Paul Allen's research ship RV Petrel found her, resting 2,800 feet down. Cameras showed her hull number, 50, still clear on the stern. Her turrets were still trained out, as if ready to fire again. For the men who survived and the families who waited, the discovery finally gave closure. Today, Helena is more than just a war grave. She stands for the thousands of sailors who fought the crucial battles of World War II. Her story still teaches lessons about courage, grit, and sacrifice. Helena was the ship that rose from Pearl Harbor's flames to hunt the Tokyo Express. She proved that heroes aren't always invincible. Sometimes they're just too stubborn to quit. Born in Depression-era Brooklyn, built by workers desperate for jobs, crewed by boys who became men, and led by officers learning a new kind of war, Helena was democracy forged in steel. The Japanese feared her, calling her the machine gun cruiser. But Helena was more than rapid-fire guns and advanced radar. She was 868 Americans who refused to surrender. They turned the disaster of Pearl Harbor into victories at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal. Even in death, her guns thundered until the sea swallowed her whole. Now, in the dark waters of Kula Gulf, Helena keeps her last watch. Coral covers her turrets, fish glide through her silent decks, but her story lives on. She was the fighting ship that earned her nickname by sheer determination, a symbol of the generation that saved the world. They called her the machine gun cruiser. And she lived up to that name until the very end. In all of naval history, few ships fought harder, fell braver, or left a prouder legacy than USS Helena CL-50. Her crew always knew the truth. She was one hell of a fighting ship.